Jonathan, you ready? Good evening. Welcome to the Township of Abington's Budget Workshop for October 22nd, 2015, as we review the capital budget and a review of schedule. And at this time, I'll turn it over to our Township Manager, Michael Lefebvre.
Thank you, Commissioner Luker. Good evening, Commissioners. I want to start off by just revisiting the fund balance policy. You're probably sick about hearing it, but for the benefit of the public and the audience and anyone that might be watching this, a tape of the meeting, as part of the preparation of the 2015 budget, we revisited our fund balance policy. The old policy basically required a minimum fund balance be maintained of 7.5% of revenue. It was suggested by staff that we adopt a minimum amount of 1 month of expenditures and maintain a maximum amount of 3-month expenditures, with any excess being transferred to our permanent improvement fund, our OPEB obligation or post-retirement health care obligations, and a small percentage we retain for support to next year's budget. The board agreed to those changes, and as a result, at the end of last year, $3 million were transferred to the permanent improvement fund, $2 million to the OPEB fund, and approximately $521,932 utilized to close the budgetary gap last year. And basically, the adopting of the new fund balance policy accomplished a number of goals. It removed our reliance on fund balance, our dependency on fund balance, to close budgetary gaps. It basically forced us in the future to operate within our revenue receipts and our expenditures, to balance the two. It also addressed our long-term capital needs, as well as provide some support to our long-term OPEB obligation. In the short term, it helped us remove a contribution, or annual contribution of $500,000 in the permanent improvement fund. That, combined with the $522,000 opening balance, helped us avoid a tax increase in the short term. So there are a number of benefits of the new policy. As a result of the new policy, the implementation of it, we finished last year with approximately $700,000 surplus, $694,164. On a budget of $36.5 million, that's a relatively tight budget. Sounds like a lot of money, but that's probably about a 1.9% variation from the total budget. So it's extremely tight parameters there. But as a result of that surplus, an additional $382,000 was transferred to the Permanent Improvement Fund, $243,000 to our OPEB, and $69,416 will be used to support the 2016 budget. That's our opening balance. So just looking at the Permanent Improvement Fund, we had an initial cash balance of $200,000. We added the $300,000 from the excess fund balance and the $382,000 as a result of the surplus in 2014. So we're starting with a $3.5 million fund. Now, when we set up this fund, we were hoping, at least at a minimum, we'd be able to maintain the fund for 5 years in the future. That's without taking into consideration any additional contributions. If you factor in additional contributions going in the future, it's realistic to expect that fund to stay in operation on a continuing basis 10 years and possibly much, much longer. It's really contingent upon how quickly we deplete it, on how much we spend, as well as the surplus on an annual basis, how much we feed into the fund. So if you look at this year versus last year, the sources of capital improvement funds, last year we took $515,000. We'd hoped to stay within the same range in 2016, but we're proposing to see even $684,000 come out of that fund. It's a little higher than we thought we would need, but you see down the bottom, we don't have the advantage of DEA funds this year. The DEA funds, the drug enforcement funds, basically, we try to maintain a balance between the receipts from that program versus the expenses. So we don't overspend, we stay within the parameter of our receipts. But without that $100,000 there, it required a little additional dependency on the permanent improvement fund. We're recommending approximately $1.3 million next year in capital expenditures. To give you a little historical perspective, in 2014 we spent a little over $1.4 million, as well as a bond issue of $3.4 million in capital improvements. Last year we were a little over $1.2 million, and this year we're between those 2 years at $1.2 $333,000. I'll just briefly touch on each department to give you an idea of what we're recommending be included. Administration, $66,000. We normally maintain a $50,000 contribution for normal maintenance of the building, of the facility, but we need to replace our boiler on the administrative side of the building at $16,000. The $30,000 that's indicated there for water damage, I mean, we have an ongoing water problem in the basement here, stormwater entering the basement. But we expect to have some money left over from this year's allocation that will be able to satisfactorily address that issue. So we think we can address the stormwater problem here and not request any additional funding. On our IT dependency, the second item, the improved backup, basically we're looking to migrate from a daily backup on tapes of our information, which we take off-site every day, and migrate to a cloud-based system. The first one, the life cycle assessment, was a proposed study of our server farm. Our server farm is approximately 5 years old currently, next year 6 years old. The expected life cycle of that equipment is probably a stretch at 7 years. Kevin and I discussed it. We're suggesting we don't spend the $7,500 on a study of the server farm. We know it's going to be old. We know it has to be replaced. But we also look at maybe migrate that to the cloud as well. It might be more, on the long run, it's more productive use of the money. The last item, it's financial software update, actually, and that's an ongoing contribution to update our software in the finance department. Last item that was deleted, DocStar is an imaging scanning and document scanning process storage that we believe we can function without, and we cut it from the budget. Economic development, the only item removed was the Old York Road Susquehanna project. That was a part of the township contribution to a grant that we have pending. As to the other items, the Keswick Township Line, Noble, and Old York Road business districts, it was suggested that some money be budgeted for support to some grants in those respective areas, but also provide some ongoing maintenance items for signage, flags, and so forth. That's been cut basically to the bone to $5,000 for each of those districts. There is some current funding in Noble and the Old York Road business districts, but we'll slowly try to increase it over a period of time to build up some funds in each of those districts to provide some support for future grants in each of those areas. The police department, we're proposing $92,500, and we basically had to decrease that because the current year we're spending about $141,000 in capital for the police, but the majority of it's coming from DEA funds. We're using approximately $95,000 this year in DEA funds. We won't have that next year, so we cut back on some of those items. Well, the items that were deleted, the digital radio transition, this is the county program where they're funding it, the interest over a 5-year period, so we're just going to pay principal on those radios that we'll be acquiring in the near future. But we've already put away funding that will cover us for the next couple of years, so we're good in the short term, and I think we may be able to come up with some funding for the locker room as well. Engineering is difficult. Initially, Mr. Powers proposed a long list of capital stormwater projects. It was apparent we didn't have the resources to fund those projects, so he came back with a modified recommendation. The first one under bond projects, the first 4 projects, we do have existing funding under existing bonds that have been unallocated, that there's basically excess bond proceeds we have available. So we can cover those 4 projects next year with existing funding. The bottom 4 items, the MS4, the stream maintenance, they're our ongoing expense that we contribute every year to the capital and are included in the proposed capital budget as well. The 1 through 6 are not presently funded, but the one that we have concerns about and is our top priority is number 5, the East Avenue storm sewer. That was supposed to be included in our community development program. Initially, it was proposed to be included in the community development program. I believe the commissioner, the ward commissioner, represented that to our residents, that it would be done next year. But unfortunately, that block no longer qualifies for community development funding. So we're cautiously optimistic there'll be enough money in unallocated bond proceeds that we will be able to address number 5, the East Avenue storm sewer. But that is our number 1 priority, so we think we can get that addressed. We made a commitment to the residents, so that's our first obligation. Public Works, there's a new line item there for the bike lane of $50,000. That's to get us started. The bike lane study will be finished early next year. We will be applying for grant funding to supplement that $50,000 in the hope that we can do probably 4 or 5 times that amount in bike lane installation and signage. The overlay, this year we did over 15 miles of overlay through basically a large component of that was the Aqua, ongoing capital improvements of Aqua. If you recall, Public Works was required to come back to the board and request money for milling to support that process. A large portion of this $315,000 will be for milling services for next year because we expect to use, we expect a similar large amount of Aqua work for 2016. The nice thing about the proposed work, it hasn't been finalized yet, the streets that will be included, but initially it looks like a lot of the streets that we have on our priority list for overlay are included in Aqua's projects going forward. And Angelo from Public Works has a great relationship with the Aqua representatives. He's been able to encourage them to work in certain areas where we need some relief in terms of the overlay of the street. So I think that will be mutually beneficial next year. The other items are basically replacement of existing equipment and vehicles. And if you look at the size of our equipment and our vehicles, it's basically a pretty modest request. The fire, we're proposing $25,000 for ongoing repairs of the burn facility, and to begin funding our needs for a radio replacement for the fire service. The county program only covers police and ambulance. It doesn't include fire because those radios are a little newer than the police and ambulance. But we have some concerns about the compatibility of the 2 radio systems, and at some point we're going to need to replace those systems at probably, at current cost, probably over $500,000. So we want to begin funding that obligation. We do generate about $85,000 through the fire tax, so that's an ongoing allocation in that budget every year. The library, we're only recommending one item, and it's similar to the problem we're having in this building, is groundwater in the basement. And they've had consultants in, and they're projecting it costs about $60,000 to address that item. Parks, there are a number of items requested and have been prioritized by Mr. Wendell. We're suggesting the first 6 be included in the budget. The number 7, the Crestron basketball court. We did put some funding aside this year to address the Crestron basketball court. We thought we could do it in-house. There's some concern, basically we thought we could repair it and overlay it. There's some concern whether that would actually last more than a few years. So we don't want to spend $10,000 there, only have to tear it up in a year or 2. So we need to flesh that out a little bit more. But to tear it down to the base and start from scratch could be $40,000 to $50,000. So we need to look at that going forward. Okay, so to recap for the general fund, we have approximately $3.6 million available. We're proposing $684,000 to be taking out. So this time next year, we'll have approximately $2.9 million in our permanent improvement fund. Now, we don't know how we're going to finish 2015. We're optimistic. I mean, ideally, if we can finish with about 3% margin over projected budget expenditures, that would be about $1.1 million, which would contribute about $600,000 in the permanent improvement fund, which would be self-sustaining from that point if we could have that kind of revenue going in. So there will be some kind of surplus this year. We can't identify the exact level, obviously, at this point. So before I move on to non-general fund, any questions on the general fund budget? I'm sorry, thank you, Kevin. Permanent improvement fund. Okay. Hearing none, just jump over the refuse. Refuse has a separate reserve where their capital items are taken from. Mr. Miklo is recommending $534,000 for 2 vehicles, a pickup truck, and looking to construct a building at the highway yard to house the refuse department. Currently, the refuse department operates out of Woodtown Road, so for operational efficiencies, it makes much more sense to have everyone working under the same facility. Ed did indicate, he did have some good news today from the state that we will be awarded a grant for $250,000 next year as a real recycling program. So whether that'll be an additional vehicle or cover the cost of one of these vehicles is yet to be determined. And lastly, we have wastewater. There's two accounts for wastewater. One is for ongoing plant operations, where Mr. Wrigley is recommending $872,000, with the bulk of that for our ultraviolet disinfectant system. That's 15 years old, that system. The maximum life of that system is projected at 17 years, and when you reach the point, it just stops. It doesn't slowly wind down, it stops. So we need to address that need sometime next year. And the other component goes to their collection system. The bulk of that is for the Old West Road new sanitary sewer system. That'll generate additional revenue back into the fund by surcharging back to the residents a portion of those costs. So we expect probably $500,000 to come back to the fund in the future. There's currently over, I think, $6 million in the wastewater fund. There's more than enough to cover both these expenditures. I know there's a lot of items that were cut out of the budget. So basically what we're hoping now, if not this evening, over the next couple of weeks, that the individual commissioners could go back to Kevin and I, give us some ideas of some other items that maybe should have been cut out, that you thought might be excessive in terms of expenditure, or things that might think should be changed. We're certainly open to any input, any guidance you could have. We're hoping November 10th to address not only our general fund budget, but also the permanent improvement budget that same evening, and reach some kind of consensus between everyone how to proceed for the actual initial budget proposal. And if I haven't confused you enough at this point, certainly answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Sanchez.
Michael, back to, not to beat the dead horse with the fund balance policy, but with the math on the current year.
The current surplus?
Right. Is that, but that leaves it at the max, right? The 3-month max in the reserve?
Oh, yes, it maintains the 300 reserve, yes,
That's
absolutely.
correct. That 694 is over the 3-month max.
Okay,
It's above the max.
gotcha.
When you say surplus.
So what's the, do you know the delta offhand for between the 1 month and the 3-month max?
1 month is approximately 3.1 million, and the 3 months is 9.1 million. My pretty little chart I can share with you.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Commissioner Myers.
Thank you. Manager Lefevre, on the page that's the administration project description, I think you went over this, but I missed it. How are we funding the $30,000 for the basement water damage?
In this year's budget, there was a $50,000 allocation for the township building. We expect to have approximately $30,000 available at the end of the year, so we'll use that money next year to address that.
Okay, so it will happen.
It will happen, and we think we can do it in-house. Our building maintenance crew through Mr. Michelo's department probably entail a French drain around the storage areas in the basement. Right now, they leak pretty heavily. Then we can repair the walls and actually clean it up a little bit. It's not a pleasant area down there in the current state.
Commissioner Schreiber.
East Avenue. So I understand it was taken off from the community development being canceled in that area. Do the residents know that? Because they were told for last budget that it was going to be repaired.
Well, and that's why we're determined to get it included. And so we worked on it today on the bond numbers. We weren't able to finalize it. We're fairly optimistic we're going to be able to do it, so we don't have to go back to the residents and say, bad news, we're putting it off for another year. We understand the position you're in. We made a commitment to the residents, and we're going to do our best to honor it.
Okay. So you're just looking where you can cut or crunch numbers
Well,
to put it together?
that's a possibility as well. But we'll definitely have an answer in the short term for you.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Gillespie.
Thank you. On the economic development, I'm looking at Old York Road, Susquehanna Road project. Are we going to be doing that? It looks like no.
Well, the Old York Road Susquehanna, we have a grant pending. But we haven't heard whether that's been awarded. That, we
Right.
won't know till the beginning of November whether that's been awarded. But there's a match to that grant. I believe it's about $600,000. So what Mrs. Waymire suggested, we put some money away
Right.
to address that need. It wouldn't cover but it'd cover a portion of it.
I
If
forget
we
what
award
that
the
amount,
grant-
what was that amount, Michael? Do you remember?
The grant?
No,
$600,000.
No, I got that, what we would have, what we were putting aside.
Well, Tara suggested $200,000.
Oh, that is the 200.
Yeah, that's the $200,000.
Oh, my.
Okay.
Mr. President, if I could
Commissioner
just quickly address that. So, just so everyone knows, November 10th is the date we find out if we got the grant. And there are subsequent, pretty much identical grants. In fact, there's an open period now, so there's subsequent grants that, in the event that we were not to get the grant, that we could apply for. So, obviously, at some point, hopefully, if things go well, we'll be coming back to look for that money.
For something.
Just an addition to that, I just got news yesterday, there's a possibility that no grants will be, they potentially will be allocated, but they won't be announced until January, just because the state budget hasn't been completed yet. So there's a possibility they could delay that for another couple months because the budget's just not done.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
downgraded
So
my
this was an email that went out from Kate Harper's office, so I don't know if it was accurate or
I'm
not,
not.
but I wasn't on it, it was forwarded to me, and it's potentially that we're not even going to hear until January, because I'm actually applied for 3 state grants, and they told me I'm not going to hear anything until January, so.
So there's that. I have some other questions, but we can go on to other.
Commissioner Jones?
It's a question for Commissioner Markman. I understand the concept, and I know this is information that you heard. So am I to understand that they're not going to announce it? However, they may actually make the decisions?
That's what I heard. I mean, I'll circulate the email I got to everybody on the board so they can take a look at it, because this affects a lot of different things.
So it may be possible that people could find out.
True, yes.
With enough charm and perseverance.
Commissioner Hecker?
Michael, a question about the engineering capital. Just broadly, I mean, obviously, there are far more important projects than can be accommodated in any given year. I'm probably not alone up here in terms of the concern about a particular project in my ward and other wards. And I'm just wondering, what is our longer-term strategy in thinking about this as a whole? I mean, the number's actually frightening when you add up the total dollar amount, and when would be the next reasonable time to think about a bond issue, or I just want to get your sense on how we're thinking about this.
That's a great question. Kevin and I had a discussion today on that very issue. We're in a great position with our debt service. Our general fund debt service will be paid off completely in the next 5 years. We have some wastewater debt and some refuse debt that extends a little bit longer. Some of those issues are completely backloaded. The 2 more recent ones, 2012, 2014, we haven't paid a penny in principal on those issues. They're all backloaded the last portions, 17, 18, or 18, 19, and 20. But I think it's possible, and possibly as early as this time next year, to consider a bond issue to address existing projects, not just stormwater, but other projects. I've been approached by a number of commissioners of projects in their specific wards, some related to stormwater, some not, that need to be addressed. So I think it's possible, again, to look at a bond issue. Again, we'd have to backload it, the principal would have to be added in the back end to maintain a level debt service over the next 5 years, but it's possible. We're in a very strong position going forward. I think as long as we manage it respectfully, I think we'll be in a good position.
No, I understand there's a balancing act, but there are important projects that I'd like to see get due consideration. Thank you.
Commissioner Spiegelman?
I just want to add my voice to Commissioner Hecker's on that. I know he and I think are on the same page with certain important projects that can't wait. And so I think I also look forward to finding out about the feasibility, especially, again, we hear it all the time, and it's something we won't hear forever. Money's cheap, money's free. Of course, nothing is free. There's a lot of stuff that got cut off here that is Ward 11 specific. I'm certainly not going to waste everybody's time going through line items, but just specifically the library stuff. hopefully, is anyone looking into the possibility of other sources of funding for that, like, library-related grants, charitable grants, because I know, the library often, they take, like a lot of the public affairs family, they end up taking a back seat when it comes to prioritization, and I'm just hoping maybe there's a way to get them a little more of what they had on their list, because there may be some specific sources that are out there that wouldn't apply to anything else.
I understand where you're coming from.
That wouldn't involve matching funds or anything like that
Absolutely.
from the taxpayers.
I mean, we're fortunate we have a tremendous library facility. We appreciate the job they do. The allocation of $60,000 next year is more than double what they received this year. This year they received $28,500, so more than doubling next year.
That is true.
The water issue is by far the main priority. The other items are on the wish list, and they're listed in terms of their priority. I think they are definitely looking at other alternatives for funding of those issues. But if they can address the main one, being the water, I think they'll be very happy.
Absolutely, and I mean it's certainly clear that the other items have definitely more of a wish list feel to them. But those also seem like maybe the kind of things that there could be some alternate non-taxpayer direct funded sources out there if somebody hunts them down.
There actually is when I was just looking at it, there's a PennDOT multimodal grant that can be applied for by December 18th, and they're between $300,000 and $3 million, and there's a 30% match by the municipality. But they're specifically for municipalities, so that's something to consider for potential PennDOT-related issues. I just forwarded the email. I'll send it to you as well.
Yeah, and actually that one, I know I've talked with some folks about that. That specific grant is sort of Plan B if the November 10th or whenever it ends up being grant doesn't go our way, because the applications would be virtually identical. Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Just had a comment.
Vice
So,
President.
Michael, you mentioned this in the beginning. Obviously, we could sit here, and I'm sure everybody has different projects that are important and are vital to certain things being done at some point in the near future. The way this has been structured, not that we can't go beyond it, but the way this has been structured is to try to maintain stability in that permanent improvement fund that we put money aside so that it is self-funding each year for at least the next 5 to 10 years. Because otherwise, as soon as we start depleting this permanent improvement fund, now we've got to find that capital funding back into the operating budget. Right now, we're able to pull it out of this separate fund. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. We have to show some restraint in our spending if we want to maintain that fund operationally for the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that's very doable, if not longer, depending on how well we do each year, what we finish in terms of a surplus. We don't want to finish in a deficit position. It's not healthy for our bond rating. It has major budgetary impacts. So we need to obviously finish in the black within reason. We're not here to make money. But I think a 3% margin is tight, but it'll be very healthy in terms of the permanent improvement fund and our OPEB obligation. Mm-hmm. Quite honestly, we could take the $3 million we have available to $2.9 million and squander it away, take care of all the projects and spend it next year. It's going to have major budgeting impacts going forward. We're going to have to, you'll have to raise taxes to offset that obligation going forward. The capital needs won't go away. It's an ongoing issue. We have a couple bond issues recently that we haven't even begun to pay any principal on. So, I know all the projects are important. We're sensitive to the pressure each commissioner's under from the residents to have some of these projects accomplished. Kevin and I will try to reach out to each one of you between now and November 10th to discuss your specific ward and how this budget impacts your ward. But we do have to show some level of restraint. We want this to be functional for the foreseeable future.
And then with respect to the bond, with the debt service, I mean, obviously the board can make a decision at any point to add additional debt. And we would have to evaluate the impact of that both on the operating expenditure and then the long-term debt schedule that we have now.
Exactly. I mean, if you were to decide tonight you wanted to adopt a bond issue next year, there's the interest component that's not factored in the budget. So, right away, that has an impact on next year's funding level. So, but you don't have to do that at budget time. You can do that anytime through the course of the year, and we can structure the debt accordingly. The interest component is potentially problematic.
The only issue, the thing with that, I think our interest rate last time was 1% or something, I mean, incredibly low. Interest rates still are pretty low, and, the question is whether you want to roll the dice in 5 years where they could potentially be higher. So if there is a real need next year, I think with interest rates where they're at right now, it might make sense, depending on how important people think the projects are, because the interest component will be much smaller than potentially in the future.
Absolutely. It's not going to get any lower, obviously. It's definitely going to go up. It's a question of when it's going to go up.
Would you need any decision from the commissioners tonight to move forward?
No, I mean, there's a lot of information we provided tonight. It's the first opportunity you've had to look at it. We want you to digest it, look it over, and, if you don't call Kevin or I, we'll call you individually to try to get your input, and hopefully on the 10th, we can address the general fund budget and the permanent improvement budget at the same time.
Commissioner Jones.
I want to go back to the debt again. So what is the soonest you would see again, just to make sure that you would actually want to borrow the drop dead earliest?
I would suggest next year, this time next year at the earliest. I mean, I'll defer to Kevin, he has a different opinion. There's large principal components in 18, 19, and 20, and then it'll be paid off. We can backload it in 21, 22 going forward, the principal obligation. It's a question of how much you want to increase the debt service budget in the short term, in the next 5 years, because the interest component will still have to be budgeted for. Kevin?
Looking at the debt schedule, I would agree with Manager LaFever. Probably this time next year, maybe a little bit sooner, to start the ball rolling of looking at projects. And we could back-end load that into years 2021 and 22, because if you looked at 2014, the whole bond issue is backloaded into 19 and 20. So we borrowed $3 million, and 2.7 of that's backloaded into them 2 years. So if you put, you could throw it into the years through, equally out, and then you'd have to raise the debt service and general fund, which you'd have to cover somewhere, or backload it, which then will keep the debt level. So I would say sometime next year to do projects for the following year.
Thank you.
The good news, our 2005 obligation will be satisfied completely this year, so that'll fall off the books. You won't see any difference in your debt service schedule because it's factored into our schedule. But at least that one falls off.
You think, Kevin, can we get a comparison of debt level compared to some of the surrounding municipalities, just so that the commissioners have an idea of how our debt, obviously we get great ratings, so it's not a high level, but I think it could give everybody here an idea how we compare to the different townships that are in this part of Montgomery County.
That they have on their books?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Make us feel better.
That's a good question. A good comment. Did you have a question, Commissioner Sweden? No. Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Any from staff? Any from residents?
Laura Lehman, 1431 Bryant Lane. I'm concerned about one thing, and that is that I'm guessing we've probably made almost no progress in getting what I've asked over many years now, to get the budget into a thing so that if we ask for a specific page on something, it's right there without all the back and forth. I saw even the commissioners were confused about the back and forths and the chargebacks and all of that, and that I'm sure can be done in a more user-friendly way. And so that is really important in order for citizen oversight, but also for board oversight. And so I would like to see some of that done. If we ask for a page, for instance, on how many donations you're making, that page should be immediately available. If we ask for a page on what you're spending on Alvathorpe and the Art Center building and so on, that page should be immediately available. That should be accessible. Some of the things that concerned me were the talk about bonds, okay? So in essence, we're taking out a bond to pay the OPEB because we had, up to, no, we're not. I know we're not. We're paying other things with it. But if we had those millions of dollars, so what happened was we ended up being able to collect millions of dollars via overtaxing, really, because what you taxed, what projects you had, all had some kind of excess that got turned back into the general fund to the tune of, at one point, up to $19 million. And that's the unrestricted funds. We had, I think you put $3 million out and another $3 million out, so we were down 16 at one point, 13, 15 at another point. All of those millions of dollars were overtaxes that I believe were designed to fill that hole that you knew was there. So the problem that I have is, again, with oversight on the budget, is that that's not very transparent. You do have a hole, and there should be a plan for how that hole's being filled, and we should be able to see where it's coming from. So if you're not spending those millions of dollars that you have on these projects that are so important, and they are, the flooding projects and so on are very important, then you would put those flooding projects out to bond and fill that hole that way. We want to be able to see exactly what's happening. What exactly is budgeted for the OPEB, for instance, this year, and what's budgeted to fill that hole. So that's what hasn't been very transparent. It's kind of all over the place. Paul Brook Lane, I'd just like to ask, that's being done again. I thought that whole area was done very, very sufficiently. Perhaps you could give me an answer on that. And I look at things like the police taser upgrade. I don't know how often we use the tasers, but I like to think that maybe that's something that, that if they have a taser now and the taser works, that maybe we don't need an upgrade. There are, in the police budget, which is, as you have said, half of our budget, okay? I'm sure there's a lot of things. I'm sorry at the first meeting we didn't hear all the departments bringing together things that could be cut. I see now that we have some cuts here, but we're going right into the last meeting already. I think that should have been at the first meeting that we talked about what departments could cut where. It seems that those are managerial. So along with Paul Brook, I'd like to know about whether those are managerial decisions or did the department help make those cut decisions. And the other thing is I see the MS4 stormwater requirements at $50,000 and then another $25,000 under that. What I'd like to know, is that going to the TTF, the entire $50,000, or where is that going? So, and do we really need to replace the trash trucks? So those kinds of things are things that, I'd like to see a sheet on the trucks, okay? So if we have transparent accounting, I should be able to just ask for a sheet on the trucks and see how the trucks are managed. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from residents? All right, if there are no other, I'll go back to the commissioners for any questions or comments. And one more time for staff. And if there are none, any comments, closing comments from the township manager?
No, we appreciate your attention, and one way or another, we'll work through this going forward. Thank you.
Okay, if there were... You asked for a whole laundry list of... Well,
we'll get back to you.
Right. The township manager just expressed a answer that he'll get back to you on those. You had a laundry list of questions there, so they will get back to you. No comment on that, Mrs. Lehman, at this time. Any other comments? Hearing none, at this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Meeting's adjourned.
The taser on this. How often do we use them? Not enough.